Why did the room go quiet when the general stepped inside? And why did his eyes stop on her sleeve instead of her face? Boots scraped back. Chairs straightened themselves. Conversations died mid-breath. The general's presence always did that, like a pressure drop before a storm. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His silence was enough to remind everyone why they stood straighter, why metals felt heavier on the chest when he passed. She didn't move. Not because she was brave, because she was tired. Captain Eliza Moore stood at the edge of the hangar briefing space, half-shadowed by the wing of a transport aircraft that still smelled of hydraulic fluid and desert dust. Her hands were folded behind her back. Her shoulders were squared the way muscle memory demanded. But inside, something restless paced. Ignored again. She learned to recognize the sound of it, attention flowing past her like water around a stone. Pilots compared sortie hours. Operators traded quiet jokes about old deployments. Even the junior lieutenant nearby stole glances at the general, rehearsing a smile that said, "Notice me." No one looked at her. That part never hurt the way people imagined. What hurt was how used to it she'd become. The general moved slowly down the line, nodding once here, pausing there. His gaze was sharp but not unkind. A man who had learned the cost of decisions long before they reached his desk. He asked a question about weather, another about fuel windows. He listened, really listened. Then he stopped. Not in front of the decorated major. Not beside the squad leader with the combat scrolls stitched like a resume onto his sleeve. He stopped in front of her. The pause was small, almost nothing, but Eliza felt it like a held breath. His eyes dropped. Not to her rank, not to her name tape. To the patch sewn just below her shoulder seam. A black oval, minimalist, unassuming, easy to miss unless you knew exactly what you were looking for. Inside it, in muted silver thread, were 4 numbers. 3,200. The general's jaw tightened, not in anger, in calculation. For a moment no one spoke. The hangar hummed, the distant whine of a generator, the metallic tick of cooling engines. Somewhere outside, wind pushed sand against steel. "Where did you qualify?" he asked. His voice was calm, but something in it had changed. Eliza didn't answer right away, not out of defiance, out of habit. She had learned that answers, like trust, were best delivered cleanly. No extra words. "High Plains," she said, "winter rotation." A murmur rippled, quiet, contained, the kind of sound professionals make when they don't want to look impressed. High Plains meant altitude, wind shear, thin margins. It meant missed shots didn't just miss, they vanished into air that refused forgiveness. The general nodded once, then more softly and operational. "Yes, sir." "How many?" She hesitated, not because she couldn't count, because numbers once spoken had weight. "Enough," she said. Something almost like a smile touched the corner of his mouth. Almost. He looked back up at her face now, really looked, took in the faint scar near her temple, the way her eyes didn't flinch, the stillness that came from knowing exactly how loud a single breath could be. "Stay," he said to the room, then to her, "Walk with me." The general turned, the room exhaled. Eliza followed. As they moved between aircraft shadows, she felt the familiar tightening in her chest, the old anxiety that came whenever attention finally arrived. Being unseen had its own safety. Being seen meant questions, expectations, history. "Most people don't wear that patch unless they want it noticed," the general said without looking at her. "I don't wear it for people," she replied. He stopped walking, turned, studied her again. "Then why do you wear it?" The answer rose fast, and she pushed it down. "Because it reminds me," she said finally. "Of what?" "That distance is honest." He held her gaze. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Wind threaded through the open hangar doors, lifting dust into brief spirals before it settled again. "Briefing in 10, he said, "front row." It wasn't a request. As he walked away, Eliza felt something unfamiliar tighten behind her ribs. Not pride, not fear. Recognition. She took her seat as ordered. The front row felt exposed, lights harsher, every movement visible. She could feel eyes on her now, curiosity replacing indifference. She kept her face neutral. The mission unfolded on screens and maps. Not flashy. No dramatic arrows sweeping across borders, just terrain, timelines, a target window measured in minutes that would never come back. A high-value courier, remote movement, mountain corridor notorious for false positives, the kind of operation that failed quietly if done wrong and loudly if done at all. The general spoke less than usual. Let others fill the space. When questions arose about Overwatch, about angles and contingencies, his eyes drifted to her. She didn't volunteer. She waited. When he finally asked, "Options," the room hesitated, then a major spoke, then another. Eliza cleared her throat. It was a small sound, but it cut. "There's a blind saddle at grid 7-4, she said. "Wind reverses there after 1600. Looks safe on satellite, it is." A pause. "How do you know?" someone asked. "I've missed there," she said. Silence again. The general nodded. "Then we don't miss there today." The plan adjusted, subtly, crucially. By the time the briefing ended, something had shifted, not in the room, in her. As people filed out, a young sergeant approached her, hesitant. "Ma'am," he said, "I didn't know." She stopped him with a look, not cold, just complete. "You don't need to," she said. He nodded, relief and embarrassment mixing. He walked away lighter than he'd arrived. Alone again, Eliza gathered her notes. Her hands shook just a little. She hated that, hated how recognition stirred old ghosts. Because the patch wasn't just a qualification. It was a memory. Years earlier, before the badge, before the silence learned the hard way, she had been loud, eager, convinced that skill alone would speak for her. That belief had cost someone else a life. She didn't think about it often, not directly. She had learned how to fold the memory small, portable, something she carried in the quiet spaces between missions. But today it pressed closer. Outside, dusk began to soften the sky. The first stars fought through haze. She stepped onto the tarmac and breathed in fuel and dust and cold air. Distance is honest. That was what the patch reminded her. Because at 3,200 meters there was no room for excuses, no room for noise, only breath, wind, choice. And tomorrow she would choose again. Somewhere far beyond the base lights, the mountains waited, unimpressed, patient. She pulled her jacket tighter and walked toward the dark, unaware that the hardest part of the mission wasn't the shot. It was what came after. And she wasn't ready to tell them that. Not yet. Why did the mountains feel closer at night, like they were listening? Eliza lay awake long after lights out, staring at the faint glow bleeding through the canvas seams of the temporary barracks. Somewhere outside, a generator coughed, then steadied. Boots passed. A laugh broke and died. Life continued in fragments, but her mind stayed fixed on the dark outline of the ridgeline she'd memorized earlier. Distance is honest. That honesty was cruel at night. It left no distractions, no mission chatter, no wind to read, just memory. She rolled onto her side and closed her eyes anyway. Sleep came in pieces. She was back at High Plains, younger, louder, confident in a way that now felt almost embarrassing. The cold had been sharper there, biting through gloves, turning metal into something that burned. She remembered the way her spotter's breath had fogged the scope for half a second too long. She remembered choosing not to wait. The shot had been clean, technically perfect, wind accounted for, elevation solved. The aftermath hadn't been. Eliza woke before the memory could finish. Heart steady, breath controlled, she trained herself well. Morning arrived gray and thin, clouds stretched like gauze across the sky. The kind of weather that made sound travel strangely. She dressed without rush, checking each piece of gear the way some people checked rosary beads. Habit, comfort, control. At the armory she felt it again, the shift. Not everyone, but enough. A pair of operators paused their conversation when she entered. A warrant officer gave a brief nod that held more respect than curiosity. Even the tech issuing rifles hesitated, then double-checked her serials without being asked. She hated how visible she felt. Recognition wasn't kindness, it was pressure. Captain Moore. She turned. The general stood near the racks alone this time. No entourage, no performance. Yes, sir. Walk with me. Again. They moved through the narrow corridor between cases and crates. The air smelled of oil and cold steel. Somewhere, a radio murmured static. You don't talk much, he said. I talk when it helps. And when it does, I listen. He stopped beside a crate marked with faded stenciling from 3 wars ago, rested his hand on it like it was an old acquaintance. You were requested, he said. Her pulse ticked once. By whom? By people who don't usually request individuals. He studied her profile. They asked for a capability, not a name. Yours surfaced anyway. She absorbed that in silence. There's an insertion tonight, he continued. Limited footprint, no support once you're in position. Understood. You'll have Overwatch authority. That earned a glance from her, brief, sharp. With final call, he added. There it was, the wait. Yes, sir. You hesitated. She didn't deny it. Authority doesn't make decisions easier, it just makes them louder. The general's eyes softened. Not much, enough. Good, he said. Anyone who wants it doesn't understand it. He handed her a folded map, old school paper, annotated by hand. As he walked away, Eliza felt the familiar tightening again. Not fear, responsibility. The team assembled at dusk. 6 operators, 1 pilot on standby, 1 sniper moving ahead of them into the high ground like a shadow they wouldn't see again once night fully fell. Sir. The team leader, a broad-shouldered man named Reyes, met her eyes briefly. He didn't smile, didn't test her, just nodded. Glad you're here, he said. So simple, so grounding. The climb began as the sky bled out its last color. Gravel shifted under boots. Packs creaked softly. No one spoke unless necessary. The mountains loomed closer with every step, their silhouettes sharpening as if drawn in ink. Eliza moved ahead alone after the split point. Her route diverged, angling upward toward a narrow spine of rock that would give her line of sight into the corridor below. She moved slow, deliberate, each placement measured. She felt the stone through her gloves, cold and alive. Wind brushed her cheek, testing her attention. Halfway up she paused. Not because she was tired, because something felt off. She closed her eyes, listened. There a subtle shift, a cross-current threading through the main flow, unpredictable, dangerous if ignored. She marked it mentally, adjusted her calculations before she even reached her perch. By the time she settled in, night had fully claimed the sky. Stars scattered thick and bright, indifferent witnesses. She built her hide with care, layering camouflage and rock until her outline vanished into the ridge. Below, the corridor waited. Minutes stretched, then an hour. Her radio crackled once, Ray's voice low, in position. Copy, she whispered. She watched. The courier appeared exactly when intelligence predicted. A small convoy, unremarkable, too unremarkable. Her scope tracked movement with practiced ease. She cataloged details others would miss. The stiffness of one driver's posture, the way another kept glancing toward the ridgeline she occupied without knowing why. Her breath slowed. Distance is honest. She waited. The convoy slowed near the blind saddle she'd warned them about. Wind reversed just as she'd predicted, sliding cool air along the rock face. "Something's wrong," Reyes murmured in her ear. "I see it," she replied. One vehicle stopped, doors opened, not panic, purpose. Figures moved into cover too quickly, too cleanly. An ambush for them. Eliza's heart rate didn't spike, it narrowed. "Hold," she said, "don't advance." A beat. Confirmed hostile. She hesitated. This was the moment authority made loud. She scanned again, read body language. Weapons came up not pointed yet, a test. Her finger rested near the trigger. If she fired now, she could break the setup, save the team. She could also be wrong. Her mind flicked, unbidden, to high plains, to breath-fogging glass, to a life ending because she hadn't waited half a second longer. "Not yet," she said. "Stay frozen." Seconds stretched like wire. Then one hostile moved too far into the open. A careless step, a mistake. Honesty. Eliza adjusted, exhaled. The shot cracked through the night, sharp and final. Wind accepted it, distance delivered it. The figure dropped. Chaos erupted below. Shouts, muzzle flashes. The team moved with controlled violence, exactly as trained. Eliza worked methodically. One target, then another, no rush, no wasted motion. When it was over, silence rushed back in, heavier than before. "Clear," Reyes said at last. His voice carried awe, relief, something else. Eliza didn't respond immediately. She scanned until she was certain, until certainty felt earned. "Clear," she echoed. Extraction came hours later, slow and careful. By the time she descended, dawn was bleeding pale light into the sky. Reyes met her at the base of the ridge, dirt-streaked, exhausted. "You saved us," he said simply. She shook her head. "We all did what we were supposed to." He studied her for a moment. "You waited." "Yes." "Most wouldn't have." She looked past him, back toward the high ground she was already leaving behind. "Waiting is part of the shot," she said. Back at base, as the sun finally cleared the mountains, Eliza sat alone on a crate, helmet resting at her feet. Her hands trembled now, delayed and honest. She let them. The general watched from a distance, said nothing. He understood silence too well to break it. Eliza closed her eyes and breathed. For the first time in years, the memory from high plains loosened its grip just a little. Not gone, but quieter. Sometimes redemption didn't arrive as forgiveness. Sometimes it arrived as restraint. And for now, that was enough. Why does silence feel louder when it carries a warning? Eliza moved through the base with the quiet rhythm of someone who had learned to belong to shadows rather than light. Morning drills clattered around her, metal striking concrete, boots in perfect cadence, but she felt removed, as if watching through a pane of glass. Eyes on her, voices acknowledging her presence, yet no one fully reaching through the invisible barrier she carried. She didn't mind. The weight of recognition, she had learned, was often heavier than invisibility. The general appeared in the distance again, walking with the careful patience of someone who measured not time but consequence. When he reached her, he didn't speak immediately, just watched, assessing. There was a storm behind his eyes, not the kind that tore through cities, but the kind that broke the unprepared quietly, morally, leaving them to rebuild themselves piece by piece. "Briefing in 15, he said, and without waiting for a response moved on. Her next mission would be different, higher stakes, less margin for error. She could feel it in the way the morning sun didn't quite reach the hangar, casting elongated shadows over the crates and equipment as though the day itself anticipated tension. Every detail mattered, the placement of a pack, the angle of a rifle, the exact pressure of her gloves on the trigger. and she carried all of it inside her chest like a second heartbeat. By midday, she was in the ops room, surrounded by maps, grids, and screens projecting terrain she would soon inhabit. Every coordinate brought a memory, failures, close calls, lessons that had been expensive in both patience and blood. The operators around her debated lines of advance, fuel windows, and overwatch points. They didn't notice her watching, or maybe they did and chose to ignore it. Either way, it suited her. Her moment came when the general finally asked, "Eliza, input." She leaned forward, eyes scanning the digital relief maps. Fingers traced contour lines instinctively. "There's a choke point at 9-3 grid. Wind shifts there after 2200 hours. Entry is possible, but visibility from high ground is optimal for cover. One misstep in detection is almost guaranteed." The room went still. A minor hesitation, but enough. He let it linger, letting the weight of her observation settle among the others. She felt the familiar sting of scrutiny, her analysis not questioned but measured. And in that moment, she understood that being acknowledged didn't lessen isolation, it merely made it sharper. The night operation began just after dusk. She climbed into position with methodical precision, her muscles remembering every step from countless previous climbs, every joint honed by repetition. The ridge was cold, the wind a subtle adversary, threading around rocks and ice like a living entity. She paused halfway, breath steadying, and listened. Something was wrong. It wasn't audible exactly. It was a subtle shift in the night air, movement where there shouldn't have been any. She adjusted her scope, catching the reflection of a flashlight too precise for patrols, too deliberate to be accidental. "Command, eyes on movement," she whispered into the comms. Ray's voice crackled back, tight and alert. "Copy," he said. "Do we engage?" She hesitated. Authority was not comfort. It was the expectation that her decisions carried consequences far beyond herself. One wrong call here would cascade into lives she could not recover. She had learned the cost of premature action long ago. "Not yet," she said, each word deliberate. The wind shifted. One figure stepped slightly too far into exposed terrain. Honest, vulnerable. The distance between them confirmed what she had calculated. The shot came fast, controlled, clean. Below, the convoy staggered. Confusion, panic. But executed with her team's coordination, the chaos remained precise, surgical. One target after another, neutralized efficiently until silence reclaimed the corridor. By the time extraction teams arrived hours later, Eliza felt the delayed weight of adrenaline and tension. Her hands shook as she adjusted her gear. She did not smile. There was no triumph in this, only the quiet acknowledgement that they had survived, and that survival often carried a hidden toll. Back at base, she stood alone in the early light, her gaze on the ridgeline she had descended. Somewhere behind her, the general watched from a distance. Neither spoke. Silence in his presence was understanding enough. Sometimes courage was invisible, and sometimes redemption came quietly, not as celebration but as restraint and measured action. She exhaled and let the quiet settle. The mountains didn't care about medals or recognition. They only measured truth. And tonight the truth had held. Why did the radio chatter sound wrong? Eliza froze, hand hovering over her headset. The familiar rhythm of base communications, the call signs, the confirmations, the careful repetition, had been replaced by a sharp staccato pattern. Not mistakes, not confusion, something deliberate. A distortion threading through, almost imperceptible but enough to raise the hair on her neck. Her eyes flicked to the scope case beside her. Fingers brushed the metal. She had trained for hundreds of scenarios, but the ones that arrived unexpectedly were always the hardest to prepare for. "Captain Moore," Ray's voice came low through the comms, steady but tense. "You copy?" "Copy," she replied. Her own voice felt brittle in the cold morning air. She adjusted her scope, scanning the ridgeline, the valley, the tree line. Every movement measured, every shadow accounted for. The convoy had been neutralized yesterday. That had been textbook, clear, precise, surgical. And yet, the warning she now felt prickling along her spine told her this was not an isolated anomaly. She moved silently, feet finding purchase where the rocks were slick with dew. The wind carried the faint metallic tang of morning frost, the smell sharp, alive, reminding her with each breath that nature, like distance, was always honest. Visual, Ray's voice was calm, but she could hear the tension. "No," she whispered, "but I feel them." The operators, relying on sensors and comms, would not see it yet. Only experience, intuition, and patience would guide them. And Eliza had both. She had honed the quiet, patient waiting over years of mistakes, each lesson etched into reflex and calculation. As she perched on a ridge above the valley floor, she saw the first hint, a shadow slipping between trees, a movement not aligning with natural wind patterns. She adjusted her breathing, slowed her heart, and let the muscles remember what calculations alone could not teach. By the time the shadow solidified into a figure fully human, she had already anticipated its path. Every angle, every potential cover, every misstep accounted for. She didn't panic. She never did. Panic was for those unprepared for truth, and the mountains, as always, demanded honesty. The first shot rang out, sharp, clean. Distance and wind met with perfect calculation. Another figure dropped. Chaos unfolded quietly, efficiently. The team moved in concert, precise and deliberate. When it was over, Eliza remained on her perch, surveying the valley below. No cheer, no celebration, only assessment. The terrain demanded it. Her team demanded it. She demanded it of herself. Hours later, in the soft light of dawn, she descended. The ridge felt heavier now, burdened with the truth of the night. Rays met her at the base, his expression a mixture of respect and relief. "You were right," he said simply. "I always am," she replied softly, though the words felt hollow. Accuracy was not pride, it was survival, it was necessity. Back at the base, alone, she cleaned her rifle with methodical care. The room smelled of oil and cold steel, familiar and grounding. She reflected on the night. Each decision, each hesitation had carried weight. Each action had demanded responsibility. The general appeared silently, observing. He said nothing. Sometimes understanding needed no words. Eliza exhaled, letting the tension slip just slightly. The mountains, the shadows, the distance, they had been honest, and that was enough for now. Sometimes vigilance spoke louder than medals, and sometimes silence was the truest measure of honor. The mountains waited, patient and indifferent, ready to teach the next lesson. And she would be ready. 5. Why did she feel like someone was watching, before anyone even arrived? Eliza crouched on the ridge, knees pressed to cold rock, scope trained on the valley below. The first light of dawn painted the horizon in pale gold and gray, but it didn't soften the edges of danger. Every movement mattered. Every sound could betray them. And tonight's mission wasn't just operational, it was personal. She remembered the early mornings in training, when frost burned through gloves and instructors yelled over wind that cut like knives. She learned to move like a shadow, to wait like the mountains themselves, to anticipate every breath of wind, every twitch of a branch, every falter in enemy behavior. But intuition alone wasn't enough anymore. Experience had taught her the price of overconfidence. The radio crackled, quiet but insistent. Ray's voice was low, clipped. "Eyes on target." "Affirmative," she whispered. Her finger rested near the trigger, the familiar pressure grounding her. She scanned again, every rock, every tree, every hollow in the terrain. Then she saw it, a slight ripple of movement along the ridge opposite hers, subtle, almost invisible. She froze, calculated, waited. Distance is honest. The figure didn't make a sound, but the movement betrayed intent. She adjusted her breathing, measured the crosswind, and lined up the shot. One careful exhale, one slight squeeze. The target went down cleanly. Silence returned almost immediately, like it had never been disturbed. Her comms crackled, target neutralized, Overwatch cleared. Ray's tone was edged with relief, though he didn't know how close he had been. Eliza didn't respond immediately. She kept scanning, eyes trained on the terrain, heart steady but alert. Experience had taught her that the moment after action could be the most dangerous, complacency a silent killer. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher, scattering light across the valley, revealing details hidden in darkness the night before. Her team moved efficiently, performing checks, ensuring no one remained, no evidence of their presence left behind. Eliza moved through the operation like a ghost, visible only to those trained to see her. Later, back at base, she reviewed the operation's debrief. Maps, grids, movement patterns, all meticulously analyzed. She noted anomalies, small deviations from predicted behavior that might indicate future threats. Her mind never rested. It couldn't. Not yet. The general appeared quietly, standing in the doorway of the operations room. No words, just observation. His presence reminded her that even excellence could always be sharpened, that every skill had limits, and every limit had consequences. "Eliza," he finally said, voice calm but deliberate, "your assessment of the blind saddle was precise. The deviation you noted, how significant?" "Minor, sir, but consistent with previous intel lapses. Could indicate a pattern," she replied, voice steady. He nodded. "Good. Observation is as important as action." She looked down at the map, tracing routes, distances, and elevations. Every number, every contour line reminded her of what she carried inside, not just skill, but the memory of mistakes, of lives affected by hesitation, of the responsibility she bore silently. Later that night, she walked the perimeter alone. The wind whispered across the base, carrying distant sounds, engines, voices, the subtle hum of electricity. She pulled her jacket tighter, feeling the weight of the patch on her sleeve. 3,200 meters. Distance is honest. She closed her eyes for a moment, reflected on every decision that had led her here, the victories, the failures, the moments no one else would ever witness. Sometimes, courage is measured not in medals or recognition, but in the patience to wait, the restraint to choose when to act, and the strength to bear the silence that follows. And tonight the mountains waited, patient, indifferent, honest. And so was she. Why did the team hesitate, just as the extraction chopper appeared on the horizon? Eliza didn't hesitate. She scanned the ridge one last time, adjusting her scope to account for the shifting wind. The mountains had a way of revealing hidden truths in the quiet moments, the subtle ripple of a branch, the faint crunch of gravel under a boot, the unnatural pattern in the smoke rising from a distant campfire. Experience taught her to see them all. Instinct made her wait. Ray's voice came over the comms, taut, "All clear." "Not yet," she whispered. Her eyes caught movement, a shadow darting between boulders, too coordinated to be stray wildlife. The team would be vulnerable if it approached the extraction point. She calculated angles, elevation, wind speed, and trajectory. Every number, every subtle variable mattered. Minutes stretched. She could feel the pulse of the valley, slow and steady like the heartbeat of the earth itself. Then, without warning, a figure stepped fully into view. Exposure complete. Honest. Vulnerable. She exhaled. The shot was precise. Quick. Clean. Distance and timing worked perfectly together. Below, the convoy remained unaware of what had just occurred above them. Her team moved into position, coordinated, disciplined, silent. When the helicopter finally descended into the clearing, they were ready. Extraction went smoothly, methodical, almost mundane. But Eliza's eyes never left the ridgeline. She knew better than anyone that the quiet moments often carried the most danger. Back at base, she cleaned her rifle meticulously, her movements deliberate and controlled. The smell of oil and metal grounded her, a reminder of reality after hours of tension. She reflected on the mission, The choices she'd made, the moments she'd held back, the ones she'd acted decisively. Each decision had consequences beyond her own life. The general appeared in the doorway. No words, just observation. He watched as she methodically disassembled her rifle, the quiet hum of the base around them. His presence was enough, a reminder that her skill and restraint were both seen and understood, even if recognition rarely came in words. "Eliza," he said finally, voice calm but edged with gravity, "your actions tonight saved lives, and not all of them will know it." "I understand, sir," she replied, not out of humility, but because acknowledgement didn't need pride to carry weight. It was enough that the outcome matched her calculations. The sun began to rise fully over the mountains, casting long shadows across the base. Eliza looked out across the valley at the ridgeline she had descended, the terrain still indifferent, patient, honest. She thought of the patch on her sleeve, 3,200 meters. Distance was honest, and so was restraint. Sometimes the hardest victories were the silent ones, one not with celebration, but with measured decisions, patience, and the quiet acknowledgement that truth and integrity mattered more than applause. She exhaled, for now the mountains had been honest, and she had been too.